So apologies for the brief hiccup that we had there. So Mark was in the middle of talking about the use of monitoring with different systems and how he's doing that on a daily basis. So apologies for that, Mark. I'll let you take it over.
Okay. So not only do we do the monitoring like pre-workout, but then also there's monitoring within the workout itself. So for instance, if we're doing like acceleration work with our athletes, if they're not hitting within, say, 95 to 100% of their all-time bests, then I will actually then stop the work, that particular exercise there and move on to the next. And it's the same way that I manage my training when I'm out like on the bike using the power meter. Yeah, I may have tested real well in the morning on the Omega Wave, but say from a muscular standpoint, I may still have some soreness or whatever, and say I had a hard interval session on that day, but I can't, push up to the power that I need to get the right training effect, then I need to adjust the training right there. And so there's no need to try to dig yourself into a hole when, yeah, you may be able to do the workout, but the cost of it may be great, so great that it's going to then take you, say, another week just to recover from that. So there's always this constant monitoring. And then also, I think that when athletes maybe don't test well, but they say that they feel good, that you use that time as a teaching moment to say, okay, let's go out and go through the warm-up, and then maybe start at the scheduled exercises that we had to see if you can reach the right intensity to get the right training effect. And more often than not that I've seen, they can't reach those levels. And so now they begin to understand that, okay, maybe there's something to the testing. Yes, I don't feel well, and that, the coach has my best interests at heart, that we're just not training for the sake of training. And prior to us getting cut off there, I talked about an example that actually happened this past weekend, where I was gone traveling on business. And so I'd given one of my athletes the free lap timing system because he was scheduled to run some sprints. So he tested himself in the morning on the Omega Wave. I uploaded his results, sent him the session for the day, and then there was speed work involved. And then he texted me back probably an hour later saying, yeah, my legs just didn't feel good today. My times were slower, so I cut myself off. So he knows now, he's highly educated now within his personal performance, that this training today, there's going to be no benefit to it. And as a coach, you're like, okay, I've done my job. This guy can monitor himself on his own, and he's training in a smart and highly educated way to where these injuries and performance indicators are guiding him, and I don't have to be there all the time.
Yeah, and that's a really tough decision to make, because it violates sort of the code of the U.S. culture, which is, you have to, endure more pain. You have to keep pushing forward irrespective of what the situation is. And I think that's one of the battles that I face in working with people, because they always think I have such a contrarian approach, but it's really not. It's grounded in the best available evidence. Are you cross-correlating a lot of the data with RPE, or do you let the data, do you place a higher priority on the data?
So that's another great question. And I think that's where the kind of, what your system is as a coach, mm-hmm. Kind of what you're using the data for, and then also the art of coaching. That's why I think coaches, especially maybe the younger coaches that are in youth and high school athletics, they're not good listeners. They are not asking these athletes questions. They're not getting the visual feedback on how the athlete is handling themselves. So yes, RPE is important, but then also looking at the athlete, and then the data is important as well. So if you're coaching and you're in the moment, you can tell, how is this athlete moving? What are the times? How was their test at the beginning? So you're taking this all in to make the decision there on what is in the best interest. So yes, the data has a importance, but then also so does the verbal cueing that I'm getting from the athlete, and then also that performance in that given moment. So it's a combination of all that.
The thing that I respect that you do a lot is your communication and the systems that you have in place they're exceptional. And I have about 10 to 12 athletes that I'm working with right now, and it's a tremendous amount of work to be on the same page with them on a daily basis, and you really need to. And I can't even program a week out with these folks because life gets in the way and things pop up, and you have to really make sure that you have these communication lines in place. And I tell the athletes, don't ever feel like you're bothering me. Pick up the phone, text me. Since I've taken that approach, they're performing at a much higher level, and the results are speaking for themselves. So it is a lot of work, and just constantly staying on top of them.
And I think part of it with the athlete is, at least what I see at the youth and high school level, is that the coaches put fear in them that they're not tough enough to work through stuff. And so when I get these athletes that have been in a fear environment, it takes a lot of time for me to now gain their trust. And we talk about peer pressure with athletes, with their peers, but I think some of the pressures that the coaches put on them is even far more detrimental to their performance, because then they always think, well, I have to do more, and if I, tell the truth that I'm not feeling well, that it's a negative on me. So that's another part of the process that I go through with these athletes, is that we are not in a fear environment. We are in a partnership here. And so that's the other thing that, you have to overcome is that, hey, man, we're all in this together. And there's a lot of things that go into reaching peak performance, and some of it is resting.
Do you think that psychology is more associated with certain sports, like, say, football, baseball, basketball versus others, or do you just see that sort of across the board?
I think that it's a culture. So in football, it's a culture of, the no pain, no gain. We're going to do these, stupid tackling drills where guys are running, from 20 yards out and trying to, just crush the other guy. The old Bear Bryant mentality of, no water breaks and all this. And so that culture is passed through from generation to generation. And even when you see young coaches now that are 22 or 23, because that culture has been so ingrained in them, that the stuff just perpetuates itself. I think basketball now is getting actually worse because of the AAU issues. So you have kids, and you may see some young athletes, they're 12 or 13 and they're playing NBA schedules. And the parents think that, okay, because we can play a lot, that my kid is going to improve, which is actually, it's just the polar opposite, right? I mean, they should be doing a lot of different things and not playing as much. And baseball, again, I think it has its issues as well, because now there's travel teams and there's more money involved. And so now these kids are pitching a lot and throwing a lot. And Then you look at Dr. James Andrews and the studies that they've done on pitch counts and all this stuff at the youth level, but then the coaches don't take that into account. They disregard the science and think, okay, we're just going to. And man, Dr. Andrews, when you read his material, he operates on these guys like 5 or 6 times more than he used to at the youth level. So I think, man, there's a lot of big time issues that we have in sports in this country that start when these kids are young. And
yeah,
yeah.
So I wanted to switch gears a little bit here. When you post videos online through social media, there are a couple themes that I see. And the one is, well, there are really 3 exercises. I see a lot of jump sequencing, and these are definitely with, athletes who I can tell have been working with you for a while. I see a lot of athletes performing oxidative squats and the kettlebell jumps. Could you discuss those 3 exercises and how you're sort of working them into your program design and how you get someone to that level? I mean, these are not trivial drills that you're having them do.
Yeah, so I can, me when you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, it froze again. So the sequence, it's a lot of very low levels. So, skipping, jump rope with no shoes on to develop, good, foot and ankle strength. Jump squats with body weight. So very easy low-level jumps that are going to allow them to get the right motor patterns down, and then also begin to develop and tendon strength that they need. Because I mean, I only watch a lot of video on YouTube. Time Warner Boulder. You still there?
Yeah, for some reason this is being really fussy right now.
Hey,
right now I can hear you. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, would it be possible to stop it right now and then I'll go upstairs and see if we get a better connection?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you don't even,
Okay.
I mean, unless you have to unplug, you don't even need to stop it if you want to just keep it going.
Okay, so I'll just walk upstairs then.
Okay, yeah, let's see if that has any effect.
Okay.
Yeah. You still with me?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. So we started talking about some of these exercises. You were talking about just developing tendon strength and motor control as a younger athlete.
Yeah. Okay, hold on. I need to go down and close because I can hear myself here. Just a second.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Okay. Let's see. So at the beginning, just making sure that we're doing the basics in the correct manner, similar to how you teach all those basic running drills with the runners, and kind of what you and I have talked about a lot is, man, making sure that we master those basics when they're younger. And I don't know if this picked it up earlier, but I watched a lot of YouTube video, and Carl Valley posted a video several years ago with Werner Gunther.
Sure, great video.
Yeah, and when you watch Werner in his early season prep, and this is a guy at the time that holds a world record, and he is doing basic jumping. I mean, so basic. And I'm like, okay, if he's doing that, then it would make sense to me that our younger athletes need to do the same thing, and even at a lower level. And this gets back to the philosophy of long term, not trying to rush things, letting the athlete know that, they're not going to be doing depth jumps or, intensive bounding drills at the beginning. We need to get those, structural things nailed down early, and then work the progression in a natural manner. So, we will go from, basic body weight exercises, with jumping. Could be for 3 or 4 months. It could be for a year. And then as I begin to see that the athlete now has kind of mastered this stuff, and we've kind of exhausted all the methods there, then maybe we start adding external resistance. So, now maybe we start doing the jump squats with dumbbells, maybe teaching them, how to do it with a barbell on their back, or starting them, with kettlebells. And then from there, then go to more intentionally loaded barbell weight, depth jumps, bounding, all that. So it's a very organic process that has no set time frame on it that, okay, we're going to do this for 6 weeks and then we automatically go to this after that, because people don't function that way.
That's comforting to hear, because people always say, well, what am I going to be doing in 4 to 6 weeks, or what am I going to be doing in 3 months? And I say, well, it's all dictated on the acquisition of the skill or what we're trying to accomplish. And there's an obvious point in time where these people acquire the skill that you're trying to train them with. So
yeah, and that gets back to the injury side of things, that if we're pushing things too fast, and say they get hurt or they're sore all the time, and we can't do the training that needs to be done to acquire that skill, then there's something wrong with the training. So, then it falls on me. That's why it's always easy to correct undertraining as opposed to overtraining. And then that's where, the Omega Wave comes into effect, that if you are trying to acquire, a skill, And if your nervous system is not functioning at a high level, then the return on trying to make them acquire that skill is not going to be very good. So understanding how these athletes are testing on a daily basis, and then based on how they're testing, can they acquire the adaptation that you want them to acquire, within that training.
No, that's great stuff.
And then, the second part that you asked was on like the oxidative work, which, we learned about in 2007 from Val when he came out and did a seminar at our facility. And at the time, we were just kind of hodgepodging training, so, we would do tempo runs. We didn't know why. We just did them because Charlie Francis did them. And, we were doing strength work based on, what Louis Simmons was doing with his power lifters just to make them strong. But once we had that seminar with Val and began to understand, truly what adaptations we need to acquire for team sport athletes, I mean, that seminar in 2007 was just like this aha moment of, okay, we need to revamp our whole system, which we did. We wrote, everything down on a whiteboard that we were doing. We wrote everything down that Val had taught us over this weekend. We erased everything that we had done in the past, and then started to begin implementing that system. Which was strictly based on the biological adaptations. So of the cardiac system, of the hormonal system, how do you improve, the mitochondria density, in like slow and fast twitch fibers. And so that's where we learned about the oxidative work. And understanding that for like team sport athletes, giving them this aerobic battery to be able to display their skill over the course of a 60 or 90 minute practice or a 90-minute match, while limiting their fatigue as much as possible so they can display their skill at the highest level. So with the oxidative work, it's all about improving that capacity at the slow twitch fiber itself. But that's down the road. At the beginning, we're just working on these basic qualities. So with our athletes, and at least with my philosophy, we're going to try to get as much out of them as possible with all like body weight movements. Jumping, sprinting, body weight strength. And then once we've exhausted all that, it could be when they're 15, 16, maybe 17, then we start moving into the external loading, and then that's where we would begin to implement the oxidative work.
Yeah, and I think that's a nice way of looking at things. I think kids they're so quick to try and get into the weight room, and then suddenly they're starting to walk around with puffed chests like the rooster in the cartoons, and the priorities start to fall by the wayside in terms of athletic development. It's a whole nother animal. So do you think, so you don't think there's necessarily a set point in time when, because parents will always ask me, when should my kids start doing resistance training? And I always say, well, that's a very tricky question. I need to see your kid. I need to basically screen them to some extent, look at what the demands of their sport are. But yeah, I think so much can be accomplished with body weight, and until you max that out, like you said, that there's no reason to really start introducing external load. So
no, and I think you just hit it right there. It's like assessment.
Yeah.
Yes, we are going to do an assessment, and then based off that assessment, and then based off the athlete's sport, then we will begin to program the athlete, not just some arbitrary stuff of, okay, man, we're going to do 3 sets of 10 with this and 2 sets of 8. It's like, at least the way I work, that's just not the way it happens.
So one of the things that we've been talking a lot about, especially since I moved out to Seattle and you're taking trips up here for physiologic testing, what are 2 to 3 things that you think the endurance community would benefit from knowing or refining their approach in terms of the advice we're giving to athletes that we may be dropping the ball with right now?
Wow, man, that's a great question. I would say that the first thing is assessing the athlete. I think that until you understand what the limiting factor is of the athlete, whether it's from a physiological standpoint or, a lot of the stuff that you and I have talked about that you really specialize in is like the movement, and in particular runners. So, what are the limiting factors on a physiological side? What are the limiting factors on a movement side? So like you and I talk about with runners having these injuries, okay? So based on your assessment, what is limiting them from running pain-free? And so you and I have talked about a lot of the fitness walking that you'll start your clients out with. So understanding, okay, this is where we're going to start. This is your goal, but this is where we need to start. And this is why. But so many people just want to start, without doing any type of assessment and then reassessing, whether it be on a daily basis or a weekly basis, to determine if they're moving in the right direction. So I think daily monitoring is number 2, but then monitoring based on that initial assessment. And then 3, I would say the last part of it is, understanding training load, and that, you can get a lot of gains at the beginning just doing the very basics. You don't need a lot of interval work. You don't need a lot of high speed running or cycling or swimming, because a lot of people are just undertrained.
Yeah, I see that a lot with long course athletes, and there's so many trends that emerge, and a lot of it's pushed by the lay press and cherry picking the literature. And it's frustrating when I get an athlete, because I have to always say, what's your understanding of how you should be approaching your training? And it's really, this is what I'm doing more and more with people, is making sure that they have a reasonable and accurate understanding of their situation going into training for an event or to reach a performance goal. Because until I address those, I feel like I'm just creating more confusion with that person.
Yeah, and that's why having a good base of assessment. So like when I started there with where you work at Harriet Sport Performance, and I guess I'll plug those guys, right now. I won't charge them for this, by the way. You can tell David and Todd that, but those guys really understand, okay, the bike fit portion of it, okay, and then when people come to you on, the running of the bike side, you're like, okay, don't even talk to me yet until you get a bike fit here. So understanding, okay, what are the limiting factors on the bike fit, especially with the way David does it, which to me is like, world class. So, okay, is the bike fit your limiting factor? And now when you see what, say, Inside Tracker's doing with, blood testing, so, I may be doing all this training. I may have my bike fit. You may, through the Moxy testing, giving me, my zones now. But because my nutrition is not right, I can't get the benefit of the bike fit and your training, because now the nutrition is my limiting factor based on these blood values. Or with the Moxy assessment, my bike fit is good, my nutrition's good, but the respiratory issue based on the Moxy feedback, that's my limiting factor. So really individualize and even like personalizing the training to understand what those limiting factors are.
Yeah, and there are so many different animals. I mean, with triathlon, especially because there are three disciplines, all with different performance demands, different risk factors for injury. It's so much work coaching athletes if they really are trying to make headway. And so, yeah, you do have to have systems in place. I think that's one of the common themes that's emerging from this. So you started getting into the respiratory piece, and that's the one thing that's just been so eye-opening is I've watched David take countless cyclists as well as other athletes through the Moxy testing. Is it even high-level athletes cannot breathe to save their life, and that's where they leave it on the table with the Moxy test, and it's you see it happen right in front of your eyes where people are probably leaving 25% in the bank when they're going to race, and it's a function of breathing.
Yeah, yeah, and it's.
And you went through that, right? Was that your limiting factor initially?
That was one of them.
Yeah.
You know, remember my saddle was about 4 inches too low, but yeah, I mean, so for the people that are watching this that don't kind of know what the Moxy is, I'll kind of give like a 2-minute, brief overview of it. So the Moxy is near infrared, which is which can be attached to the working muscle or to the non-involved. And at least within those assessments that I've done with David, it's actually giving you live feedback on SMO2 and THB or blood flow, and then within that assessment that you do on the bike, which is a step test, then David is using also the pulse oximeter, to see how the O2 levels are. So with me, like on my first test, cardiac system wasn't my limiting factor. I had plenty of fuel on board when you look at the SMO2, but because I couldn't get rid of the CO2 per se with my respiratory system, I couldn't tap into that fuel source. So that was my limiting factor. So after that first assessment, I got the right zones to work at with heart rate. And the Moxy, the way that they program it, there's 4 zones. So there's active recovery, there's a structural endurance, there's a functional endurance, and there's a high intensity. So I started working within, those zones appropriately, but then also with the Power Breathe, started working on my breathing, twice a day. The next test, my respiratory issue, so I retested, I think 4 weeks later. I was better, but still wasn't tapping into all that I had on board. Started working at the new zone, continuing with the breathing. And then this last test that I did was my best assessment. And that limiting factor of the respiratory is now beginning to narrow. And so that's what I like about these assessments is it's not that you're, good or bad. It's just telling you, okay, this is what you need to work on. So to me, it's like, man, this is awesome.
Yeah, and I think that's going to simplify. People used to do a lot of lactate testing, and I think the Moxy is going to become really the go-to standard when it comes to physiologic testing. And I like how it just simplifies the ranges. And what I learned from going through the Moxy testing, I did it on the treadmill, is I don't need to spend a lot of time doing these runs at like 7 to 7:30 pace to create a stimulus for me. I've built such a robust zone that it's really higher intensity stuff. So I'm not running nearly as much. I'll run, typically 3, no more than 4 times a week. And they're typically shorter, and again, I'm not cheating the volume entirely, but, where I'm focusing most of my energy on is these, shorter, higher intensity bouts of running where I may go on and the treadmill and do, say, 4 or 5 minute bouts running at 10 or 11 miles per hour, and they're terrible workouts. But I'll be curious to see how things go when I do my first race in a couple weeks here. But on the flip side of that coin, talking about active recovery, I cannot go outside to ride my bike if I'm doing a recovery ride, because I'll end up working too hard. So I try and keep my heart rate below 100, 110 beats a minute for active recovery. That's like a 3 to 4 out of 10 on the RPE scale if we cross correlate it. And I think most people, it gets back to that saying, the easy days versus the hard days. You know, so most people's hard days aren't hard enough, and their easy days are too hard. You know.
And that's where I think, kind of going back to a question that we had, a little bit ago on, what are, 3 things, that the endurance community falls short on. And I think it gets back to the recovery side of it, especially on the training side, because people will say, okay, I only have 6 hours a week to train. So out of that 6 hours, 5 hours and 55 minutes needs to be always high intensity. And that's the wrong way to think about it, especially if you don't have a good fitness base, that those 5 hours are going to crush you long term. So really understanding, that's why athletes should be athletes and coaches should be coaches. And always trying to say that I have to go hard all the time, as you just mentioned, it's just not of any benefit.
Yeah, I think that's very important. So I guess the final question that I have is, right before I got on this call, someone had posted an infogram. I think it was based off of Lemieux's work, who's done a lot of work with tapering and looking at intensity. This was related to strength training, but strength training and running. As a performance coach, having worked with a lot of running athletes, what would be your advice when it comes to incorporating strength training into the overall mix?
Yeah, I think that the strength training is vitally important, especially with the younger athlete. Well, actually, all of them. But number one, I think it gets them out of that just constant running rut. And you can do a lot of good things with, different single leg movements, different, oxidative work, or, even heavier work to produce, hormonal changes, that'll benefit, the athlete long term. So, and again, it kind of goes back to how we do it in jumping. It's, starting them off with the basics. So for an athlete, a younger athlete, they could use jump training as a form of strength training. So they could do, uphill jumps, they can just do, jumps in place, box jumps, things like that. But giving them a bigger battery of athletic movement, number one. 2, then you get the strength benefit. And then 3, hopefully, working on that, reactivity off the ground. And then as they get older and progress through that, then you can begin to add the resistant portion of it. And especially once they get older and they're running full time, having that early season or general prep phase as a time that maybe you're going to begin to institute like more of the oxidative work. And I can say that from personal experience, and then talking with one other coach in this country that works with high-level runners at the NCAA level, that that work has a direct correlation with performance based on the feedback from the athlete on a subjective level. So I think it's extremely important, but again, it's how you apply it. I think there are coaches, especially at high level, that get on the internet that put video on there of their athletes, excuse me, doing things that have no place in the programming of a runner, whether it's doing, power cleans, and I'm talking endurance athletes, power cleans, stuff on Bosu balls, on half moons, that these guys are Olympic athletes. It just has no place. It looks good, but I think it's just totally wrong. And then that filters down to the younger coaches, so then they think that they need to have their athletes doing this. And then again, then you get into issues where it's like, it's not even appropriate for the athletes or even the sport itself.
Yeah, I share those sentiments exactly. So, well, hey, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I really appreciate you having a chat with me. And people always ask me in Seattle, you know, they tell me they have a gifted son or daughter, and I say, take a trip to Portland. It's a no-brainer. And the reason I say it is I want them to come and work with you. And I think you have the right team in place. The sky's the limit with a lot of these folks. But when I look at the stuff that you're posting, Mark, and you're developing these athletes over 7, 8, 10-year periods, I mean, that's the way it should be done. You're not violating the RTF rule. You're grounding them in fundamentals. You're protecting them from themselves, and you're creating the right culture, which is very challenging to do in this day and age, especially in our country. So I've learned a lot from you. You've been a big influence. And the two things that I always use that are sayings that you know you told me is not rocket science, but stress equals stress equals stress. And I was just having this conversation with a fellow yesterday, and I said the days that you're really stressed from your professional commitments, these are not the days that you should be trying to have your breakthrough workout. And the other thing that you said that really resonated with me, it's just as important what you take away from a program as it is what you add. And I think that's something that I just see time and time again. And but you're a wealth of knowledge, and I really like the stuff that you're up to, and I'm glad to have connected with you. So what's the best way for people to contact you or reach you in the event they want to work with you?
So my website is results.1.com. I'm at Twitter at results_period, or my personal Facebook page just under Mark McLaughlin. And you know, hopefully, you know, I'll have my 50 city big stadium concerts this year where I'll just be talking for you know, 3 hours.
I'll be traveling around in a VW bus.
Yeah, I think, you know, the first stop is Yankee Stadium. So, oh God, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. So anyway.
Well, you've been traveling around though and speaking quite a bit, and I'm sure it's a pretty fresh perspective, especially for team organizations who really need systems in place. I think that working with an individual athlete's one thing, but you know, once you have a team, it's a completely different animal. So
yeah.
Well, hey, thank you so much. And again, this will go live on my YouTube. And apologies to our viewers for any hiccups with the technology. So, but everything should be there. And reach out if you guys have questions. And just wanted to thank you again, Mark, for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, thanks again, Chris. My pleasure.
Okay, I'm gonna power off. I'll chat with you after we get off here.
Okay.